Welcome back to Media7. New Zealand Book Month has come around again, rightly celebrating our words in print. But what's the state of writing and publishing books here, and its future? Simon Pound caught up with a few people at a Book Month event hosted by our sibling show, The Good Word.
I don't think any of them know what they're doing, but they're the ones that are going to have to come up with the solutions. I'm not convinced that authors are going to do what bands can do now and self-publish digitally and disseminate it via the internet. I think publishers possibly are going to have to reinvent the wheel.
The thing you need to bear in mind about having a publishing house behind you is that you've got a whole team of good people. You've got somebody who can give you good advice about the structure of the book and the whole overall approach. A good editor really can give you a lot of good advice. Likewise, the marketing resources that a publishing house has are inevitably going to be much more robust and significant than you can put together yourself.
Although times are difficult, I think writers would be foolish to avoid using publishers. So here's a salute to publishers.
I mean, there's an expectation, I think, for any author coming through now that they will be expected to do public appearances, to do media, obviously. I mean, it's just a fact of life.
What the internet's provided is more opportunities for them to do it. So in the past it would have been a bit embarrassing to walk around with your own kind of t-shirt on or something like that. But right now, if you want to have a website and sell your own books, publishers support that.
And I think there's been a period where publishing has kind of gone downhill a little in terms of editorial support for authors and various other things, but I think they're going to have to step up and be much more an advocate for authors and helping them get their work out there.
I mean, I think it all comes down to the book, a book, the thing that is a book. I do think that it's actually almost a piece of perfect technology. Everybody keeps saying that it's going to be superseded, but in fact, if you just want to put a bunch of information together and make it portable, it's still easier to transport than a laptop or a Kindle or anything. You can take it to the beach, you can take it on a plane, they're not going to tell you to turn it off during takeoff or anything. So I think the book will actually survive.
You know, I think the publishing industry is in good heart. There's a lot of people there who are very genuine about what they do, and I think they will get stronger. They will have to.
Simon Pound with that report. For further discussion, I'm joined by reviewer, publisher and blogger Graham Beattie, owner of the Women's Bookshop in Auckland, Carol Bew, and Book Month director Michelle Poles, who is also the 2010 Robert Burns Fellow at Otago University. Welcome to you all. Now, Graham, that looked like a vote of confidence for publishers that we got there.
Yeah, and I would absolutely agree with what Finley had to say and others. The publishing industry is in good heart. There's 1,500 or 1,600 books published in New Zealand each year. Worldwide in the English language is close to 500,000. The numbers are not going down. It looks pretty healthy to me. I
was interested though in what David Slack said there about big publishers having big marketing resources. That is not how it looks to me in that industry. It's not the most marketing savvy industry as far as I can see.
No, although, you know, there's much, it's 10 years since I was directly involved in corporate life in the publishing industry, and in the days that I was there was no such thing as a book publicist. Today, the big multinational companies, and the 4 or 5 of them in New Zealand, they've got 6, 8 publicists. The smaller publishers, the local domestic publishers, they employ freelance publicists. There's an enormous amount of effort made, much, much more than there has been in the past. So I think they probably are more savvy now than they were before.
Has that been the big innovation, actually, you know, going and hiring publicists? Or?
It has, it has. And I mean, you know, because I'm a reviewer, these people are in touch with me all the time and they're incredibly efficient. They know they get the book to you, they get cover images to you, they give you all the background on the author. They're impressive.
Carol, do you have the same experience?
I agree.
Is it just the big publishers who are able to do the job?
No, the small ones do it well also. I do think they have very good promotional and marketing teams, and I think they work very hard trying to get books into the media. I think there's a problem with there are, you know, this many books and this many media possibilities, whether it be the printed word or television or radio or anywhere. And the sort of people that I've heard perhaps complain about not getting media for their books are people who are self-published. And I think there's a real problem there because you have to ask the initial question of why did no publisher publish their book in the first place? Often, where people bring books to me all the time.
A stigma to self-publishing.
Well, what I'm saying really is that a lot of people who bring their books to me that they've self-published and would like me to stock, often I will take them on a sale or return basis out of kindness to give them a chance. But really, I know in my heart they're not going to sell because they're really not very good. Occasionally you will get a really good one, but I mean, if there is a stigma, it is often justified, I'm sorry. And I would agree with what David Slack was saying, that having an editorial team and a marketing team behind you is the reason you have a publisher. One of the great dangers in the future of anybody being able to publish anything on the web is that you don't know whether it's, I have to be polite and say rubbish or not. There's no gatekeeper, there's no judgment of it. Anybody can put anything up there. It's why we have publishers and reviewers and critics and awards and festivals, because the best are selected. Yeah. And I think that's really important.
Well, and by that token, Michelle, it must be a feather in your cap to be picked up by Penguin. It's such a well-known and strong brand.
Yeah, definitely. It's certainly made an impact, I think, probably in retail as well. When I talk to retailers, they will, without, not without question, but they will look at titles with approval depending on where they come from, as Carol says. If it's self-published, they might look at it twice and go, I'm not sure about that. I think that there should be a distinction made between marketing and publicity in this conversation as well. I think that the big publishing firms particularly have got big publicity teams behind them, but they don't necessarily have the same sort of marketing budgets as a big international, bestseller might. So there is still a discrepancy there, and that's probably where the New Zealand, or a part of the New Zealand book story, why it's still, clawing its way into the market.
So do you go into it, knowing that, well, Penguin's picked up my first novel, that's great, knowing that you are actually going to have to go out yourself and do interviews and sell it? Is that absolutely part of the job?
I think so, personally, but I'm in a unique position where I'm a communications person. That is my, my role and job, and so it's much easier for me to turn up and talk to people and read books, and I don't have any issues with that. But there are a lot of writers who are writers. They don't want to talk to people, and so they do find that a really big challenge. And so that is something that's going to perhaps make it more hard in a more competitive environment, but it's one of those questions that it really depends on who's doing what. I think if you do put yourself out there, then you're going to reap more benefits because you're able to. But
I've just run a ladies' literati on Sunday afternoon. We had this wonderful afternoon tea, and 14 women writers, New Zealand women writers, who've all published new books this year, and they were splendid. They were amazing, and the event was sold out. Well, sold out way in, it always is each year, sold out way in advance. So it's like the Auckland Writers and Readers Festival and all the other festivals. They're enormously popular. There's a huge reading public out there, but the writers performed extremely well. I mean, to get up and read your own work to a full auditorium of 350 people is not always easy, as you say, Michelle, for some people, but they were splendid. They know it's part of selling their own book. They have to front up and let people hear their voice, and they do it, on the whole, I find they do it extremely well.
Well, I actually think that's one of the things that makes your business at the Women's Bookshop work, is that you do market it. You know what your niche is and you market it.
Yes, and I promote women writers, and particularly New Zealand women writers, and it works, yeah.
This is where the independent booksellers have got it all over the chains, Russell, because they've got their own investment in there and they're interested in what's going on around them. And just along the road from Carol is a Cook the Books, another bookshop, a specialist book, which just sells cookery books, nothing else. And these independents, I'm lucky enough to live in Ponsonby in Auckland. There are half a dozen of them around the place, wonderful booksellers. And they get the authors involved as well. It's a very, very effective way of selling.
And also we read, sorry to interrupt, we read.
Yes,
the independents who are passionate about what they do, we actually read avidly. So we can hand sell books. I mean, I'll hand sell Michelle's book to my public because I've read it. I particularly read fiction, and a lot of my customers read, good quality fiction, and I've read most of it. So I can hand sell it to people.
And you have a little note on the book with actually a couple of paragraphs saying why it's a good book.
Yes.
Which is exactly what we don't get from the big chains. I mean, do they deserve the bad rep they have?
Well, yes, it's interesting actually, because in this last year, where we've internationally there's been a significant economic downturn, the independents, many of them have increased their turnovers. Yes. The chains have gone backwards. That's because there's people like Carol and other really good independent books who read, who recommend. They're like good music stores. They're still there because you go into Marbeck's or Radar or somewhere like that. They've listened to the music. They can tell you about it. It's the same with the independent booksellers. They're great.
But the chains do make an impact on publishing as well, though, because you know the big chains have such a large segment of the market that if they decide they're not going to stock that book, then the publisher has to think very clearly about where they're going to put it and if they're going to place it. Can we afford to do it in hardback? Perhaps we should remove some of those end notes, because otherwise if they don't pick it up, then that's a really big volume that they have to be considering.
You mentioned small publishers before. I would just like to say that one of the most successful books in the last year has been Kate de Goldie's 10 PM Question, and that is published by Longacre, which is a tiny group of 3 or 4 women in Dunedin, a very small publisher. They're distributed by Random House, so they do have the marketing force of Random House New Zealand behind them, but a tiny publisher with an absolute triumphant book. It's been
you've got Kate de Goldie going down Ponsonby Road on the fire station.
Well,
fire engine this
Michelle's
month.
involved in that as well.
Sorry.
We've on the final day of New Zealand Book Month, we're going to start Kate de Goldie in the Lees Institute Library down in St Mary's Bay Road at 11 o'clock, and then when she's finished there, she's coming down Ponsonby Road, stopping all the way, and we'll have various celebrities on street corners waiting for her who are going to read from her book, and she'll leap off the fire engine and read with them, and she'll end up at the Women's Bookshop hopefully around about 1 o'clock, and we'll be giving spot prizes.
Just before we finish, I do want to get on to the way things are changing. One big change obviously is that people aren't limited to physical bookstores to get what they want. Is it a problem for you that someone can walk in and say, I want this title, you don't have it, the publisher won't bring it in until there's enough demand, and they go and buy it off Amazon and get it a week later? Is that a problem for you?
It hasn't. I mean, we've continued to grow every year, so it hasn't been a problem so far. We have a very good website ourselves, and we get a lot of sales on our website every day. So we're actually mailing out, courier posting out individual titles all over New Zealand and sometimes overseas as well, every single day. I mean, piles of books. Yes, I'm sure there are a lot of people who go to Amazon. I still think there are a lot of people who like to pick the book up and see it and feel it before they buy it as well. So far so good. I imagine in the future we may be selling Kindles and readers and various things. I was going to ask you about that.
Can you stay in the game when it comes to ebooks?
Well, I suspect we'll be selling them alongside each other, I hope, because like Finlay said on the interview, I cannot imagine the real book, which is technologically perfect, actually not existing anymore, but we may well have other things alongside it. And hopefully some sort of station in the shop where people can download the book they want onto their little machine.
That's the power of the independents, is that flexibility, because they are small, you know, they can go, well, we're going to do that. If you think about the photography industry, I remember working with Kodak when the end was nigh and the Titanic was sinking, but some of the Kodak was based as a sort of a franchise operation, and a lot of the smaller people went, right, okay, we're going to grasp this with all hands, bought these machines that, you know, were self-operating, and because people were shooting in digital, they were actually making more photos, so they're printing more photos. So some people were actually doing better out of it than they're not. So it was really about the fast and the furious and the people that were willing to innovate that made the difference between sinking or swimming.
Now, last word to you, Graham, because I know you keep up with this. Last time you were on, we talked about new digital reading devices, and I don't think the Kindle had even been mentioned at that point. How much have we moved along? You know, is this new device from Apple Computer that's coming out next year?
Well, we haven't moved very far at all yet in New Zealand because you can't buy them. You can't buy the e-book reading devices. You can buy a Sony reader overseas, the UK, say, bring it back with you and you can put books on it and what have you, that's fine, through your computer onto the Sony reader. The Kindle, which made a big announcement last week that they were going international. In fact, New Zealand's one of quite a number of countries, New Zealand and Canada are two notable ones, where they're not making the Kindle available. You can buy a Kindle in New York, bring it back here, and you can't load anything onto it. You have to be in the US or another country where it works. So far, it hasn't happened much in New Zealand, but in the US, where it has happened, 3% of all fiction sales are now in electronic form, and by the end of next year, early the year after, about 10% of all textbooks will be. So it's happening slowly. It hasn't really impacted here yet.
We'll have you back on for Book Month next year and see whether we've gotten any further. Thank you very much. Thank you to Graham Beattie, Carol Bew and Michelle Poles. That's the end of this discussion, and with that, our show. Thank you to our reporters panel, Lisa Owen, Adrian Stevenon and Leilani Mamoisia, and thanks to you for watching. We'll be back with Media7 at the same time next week. Until then, goodbye.